We will go ahead and get started. There's only a few of us in here, but I'm actually kind of excited about that because maybe we can have a little bit more of a small group discussion as opposed to me just lecturing at you because who enjoys that for very long? But anyways, my name is Molly Pannell. I am a learning specialist here at Baylor, and I'm so excited to share with y'all today about social work and about the role and value that they play in academic support. This is kind of bred from when I was trying to get into this field. Some people that I was interviewing with didn't necessarily understand how social work background could play well into the field of academic support. So I'm excited to share with you guys today. The first, or I'm going to tell, I guess, a little bit more about me. I got my bachelor's of social work from the University of Georgia, and then I went ahead and got my master's as well. Fortunately, when you have your BSW, you can get your MSW in a year. So I was really fortunate to stay at the University of Georgia and be a double dog and get my master's there as well. When I was in my master's program, I found an academic mentor position at UGA Athletics, and I really had no clue that I could even possibly work in sports. I grew up playing softball. I didn't continue in college, but I've loved sports from such a young age, and I wanted to be in that industry. But with my desire to serve people and love people well, social work just made more sense to me at the time. But then when I found out about this academic mentor position in grad school, I was like, oh, well, okay, that's perfect. I can be in the sports industry and also, serve people well. And so I got that mentor position. And then through my direct report as a mentor, I was able to find out about student development. And at Georgia, that's called the Georgia Way. And I got to work with Lee Futch and Heather Jordan and Robert Miles, really great people. And I spent a year working for them as their intern. And while I was doing that, I was also being an assistant learning specialist at night. So I would come back after the workday and I would work with students at night, building those skills to create that independent learner. And I just really, really fell in love with it. I loved the relationships that I was able to build with these students. And I just loved the idea of we're building skills to make you confident in the classroom and an area that if these kids are on caseload, a lot of times, there's a gap in where they're at and where, a typical student at the university is at. And so I just loved building skills to give them confidence in the classroom. So during my time there, I felt that I needed more hands-on experience as a learning specialist before I could compete for full-time positions. So I got the position here at Baylor as an assistant learning specialist and really have loved it so much. And then actually this semester, I have transitioned into have a full caseload of students and just loved it even more with having more students that I get to work with and being up here on a regular, consistent basis in the office. I just love it so much. And I hope that my love of what I get to do shows through this presentation that I get to give with y'all or get to have with y'all. So the first thing we're going to do is I would love to hear a little bit of your feedback. You can either drop it in the chat or you can unmute if you would like to, but I would love to know kind of what comes to mind when you hear the term social worker. Someone who advocates for others. Okay, I like that a lot. Change agent. Ooh, I like this. Helper. Yes, I would agree. Is there any sort of advocate? Thank you, Lauren. Is there any sort of maybe negative biases that you think a social worker or you think of when you think of a social worker? Thank you, Colette. I like this supports the holistic person. I appreciate that one. But are there any maybe negative ideas that or connotations with a social worker that y'all can think of? And nothing's off limits. You will not offend me at all. Home visits. Nope, that's right. Child protective services, Yes, yeah, Caitlin, sweet, perfect timing. Child Protective Services or Department of Family and Children Services, based off of whatever state that you're in, what they are calling that. But yeah, those are actually two of probably the biggest ones I would say, is the idea of a social worker just comes in to take kids away from their parents, or they investigate abuse, or they only come in to someone's life when there's a crisis, which they're definitely pieces of a social worker, but not the full breadth and length of what a social worker is. So I have this definition I'd love to share with y'all from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and it talks about what the duties and the role of a social worker is. And so right off the bat, we're going to be helping people solve and cope with a variety of problems that come up in their everyday life. And this could look like someone's been laid off due to COVID and they have two littles at home, so they can't go out and apply and look for another job because they have littles at home, but they can't financially afford daycare. So it's kind of just a big mess. So a social worker in that setting would come in and say, okay, ultimately the problem is we financially can't afford daycare, but in order for us to get a job, we need to knock out this first issue of how do we afford daycare so that we can go out and look for another job. So they're going to come in and advocate and find resources around free or reduced daycare so that this person who's been laid off is able to go out and get a new job to provide financially for their family. So another thing that's interesting about the profession of social work that I'm not sure translates to many other either degrees that we seek in education and higher education is that we can work in a wide variety of settings. So some of these traditional settings look like working for Child Protective Services or the Department of Family and Children Services, or working in a hospital setting. One of my best friends from grad school, she currently works with expectant mothers, and so making sure they get prenatal care, and then also what's the game plan for once baby's here, what does that look like for pieces of our everyday life, how can we plan ahead so that we're not caught quite so off guard when baby does come. Another typical place that social workers work is in domestic violence. I had the opportunity to work both in domestic violence and in foster care when I was in undergrad and grad school. And so that's everyone employed by both of those agencies that I worked for were all social workers. So really heavy social work fields. Then I would say maybe some more non-traditional roles would be my role now as a learning specialist at Baylor. I thus far have not met another social worker who is in learning support. I really hope to change that. So maybe if y'all are social worker in learning support and academics, I would love to hear from you. Oh, yay, Taylor. That's awesome. I'm so excited. We'll have to connect after this so we can talk about our cool social work things. But anyways, there's also someone that I recently learned about who's in our disability services office on Baylor's campus. And she is a social worker, which I think is really cool. But diving a little bit more into what a social worker is and does is, we're identifying people and communities in need of assistance, which in academic support, we do that, right? When students come in, we're screening them to see if they qualify for further psychoeducational testing, et cetera. So specifically an area that we're already, working in here in academics, we're assessing a client's needs, situations, strengths, and support networks so we can determine goals. We're helping them adjust to the change and challenges that naturally come with life. The death and dying process, the birth process, there's a lot of large life events that happen that a social worker can aid in and kind of help connect the dots and put all of the pieces of the puzzle together so it doesn't look quite so messy. And then also, like I talked about earlier in the ideas around social work, we do respond to a lot of crisis situations. So for example, when I worked in domestic violence, I was trained and manned an emergency crisis line. And so the people that were calling me were definitely calling me out of a time of crisis due to abuse. And so I had to put on my, problem solving, critical thinking hat and be empathetic and understand, these people are coming to me in one of the potentially, biggest crises of their life. How do I serve them well and serve them as a whole person? We're also following up with clients to ensure their situation has improved, maintaining case files and records. And then another huge piece is developing and evaluating programs and services. one of my classes specifically in my master's program was all about program evaluation. So in college athletics, in the academic field, we have a lot of programs that we put on for our students, but what's the point if we're not going to evaluate and continue to get better and continue to grow? And so I think that is a huge piece of social work, is being able to, one, develop, but even more importantly, evaluate programs to make sure that we're having the outcomes that we want to have. So I think those are probably some of the biggest pieces of social work. So on this next slide, we're talking about the skills specific to a social worker. There's going to be a lot of these that as adults, hopefully we have a lot of them, but I think overall, these are skills that social workers tend to have in spades, mainly because we spent 4 years of undergrad, potentially 1 to 2 years of grad school, really honing in and working on and being exposed to these skills. So I'm going to go through a few of them here with y'all. So empowerment, it's a skill that it's not tricky to learn, but I think it's one that we often forget about, especially in our field of, it will be just so much easier for us to do it for them, for us to find this XYZ for our student, because it's going to take them maybe 5 minutes where it would take us 1 because we've done it so many times, right? So empowerment is focusing on achieving goals and change through the available strengths, resilience, and resources. So in this, we're really focusing on, okay, what is the goal that we're going to set? And then based off of what is available to you already, how can we empower you to meet these goals, maybe even reach a little bit further than what you're capable of. So we're supporting resourcefulness and the development of skills, which in any of the facets of athletic, academic sectors, we're always about supporting resourcefulness and the development of skills. So if you're an academic counselor or you're a learning specialist and your student texts you and asks you something that could be Googled, we are hoping that eventually we're going to create a learner who's independent, who can Google that for his or herself or find this resource for themselves without the consistent need, for us to point them in the right direction. So we're practicing that competence promotion rather than the notion of deficit. And something that I think is really interesting is a lot for a learning specialist specifically is there's a sense of vulnerability that comes with our students, right? So they're on caseload because there is this natural deficit from the average student that is at college here. So they qualify for caseload or they get on caseload, based off a few different things, but it's usually because it's a little bit lower than the average student. So there's a vulnerability there. And every single day I'm coming in to work with Molly because I maybe am not as great as another student or as equipped as another student or as my learning challenge has really caused me to struggle. So we're practicing instead of, okay, there is a deficit here, we're practicing, but hey, you might have a deficit in this class or in this subject as a whole, but you are super great at these other things, and we're going to continue to develop your skills in those areas. So overall, we are building individuals' power by cultivating the belief that they can change their circumstance. When you boil it down, a student has all the power in the world and the only power to change their grades and to change the outcome, of their college career. So reminding them that they have strengths, they are resilient. Look how they were able to get here, get to this college that they're at, get to this academic program that they're at. And what resiliency that takes, to achieve this. So a good example would be, a student athlete scored poorly on a test, doesn't know how or if their grade can bounce back. So some empowering practices would be, you're encouraging that student athlete to reach out to their professor, ask, how can I study better for this test next time? I did X, Y, and Z, and it didn't necessarily translate to my test. How can I do that better next time? So then they're going to be adjusting their study habits individually, but also with their support. So with their learning specialist, with their tutor, being able to adjust how they or their plan of attack for like the next thing. So, but then under the underline of all of this is we're reminding them of the resilience they have to get to this point and the strengths they have to push through. Because like I said, not many people get to this point in college athletics. And so, or just in college in general, even if you took out the athlete part, the amount of people who get to college and stay in college is rather small. So the resilience they had to that was bred in them, that not everybody has that ability. So up next is communication. Again, this is going to be a tool that, yes, hopefully a lot of adults have, at this point in their life and at this point in their career. But I think it's something that social workers have the ability to have the upper hand on, I would say, just a little bit. So the idea behind communication is we're effectively exchanging information with an understanding of the emotion and intent behind the information. And I think that's a big piece of it, because I think so often when we're communicating with friends, with family, with other professionals, sometimes feelings get in the way and feelings get hurt and intention is confusing. So being able to effectively share information while also having this understanding of the emotion and intention behind that. But I think for social workers, there's two things specifically, like the knowledge of verbal and nonverbal skills. We're aware of our body language as we're in sessions or as we're meeting with students, and trying to be cognizant of that, throughout our session and throughout our meeting. But I would say probably the biggest point for me on this side and just about communication is in general is social workers have this ability, or they've been exposed to a wide array of people groups during the education process. And this is going to breed awareness when speaking to distinct people groups. So for example, I had the opportunity, I spent over 800 hours in my internship in undergrad and grad school. And with that time was exposed to several different people groups. And then fortunately in my social work program, it was not a homogenous program. Not everybody looked like me. And so I had the ability to learn from my peers, as well as, I had a really diverse group of professors that could bring and shed light on things that I didn't have to deal with as a white woman. And so I really loved that, and just the exposure that I was able to get in those 5 years of college for me, I think upped my game as a social worker and as a communicator in total. And then I think overall, like when you have someone or have a multiple people who are great at communicating, this is going to aid in cross-departmental communication, which in athletics, specifically in academics, that is huge, right? For academic counselors to be in communication with learning specialists, in communication with coaches, I think it's a huge piece of our profession. So next up is this advocacy piece, and that's focusing on engaging and purposeful actions that will advance rights, opportunities, causes, and human dignity. So we're thinking in terms of responsibility, both to improve our condition for client, student, athlete, insert population here, and we're advancing opportunities that others are facing, similar issues. So it's most likely what I've experienced is if one student athlete is experiencing it, multiple student athletes are probably also experiencing that same thing, depending on how large or small your student body or student athlete body population is. So an example for this advocacy piece is a student athlete recently learned that after psychoeducational testing, they've been diagnosed with a learning disability. They're frustrated with their diagnosis and would rather just try it on their own without disability services. So a way to advocate for this student would be taking the time to walk them through all the potential services that they are going to have when they qualify for disability services, and then also reminding them there's a number of students in the student body population who have learning challenges and learning disabilities who use disability services. And also there's several other student athletes who use them as well. So advocating for them to remind them that they're not the only person who's struggling with this. And since you do have this thing that you're struggling with, there's this whole body of people that are striving for you to have a successful college career. And so tapping into that can be incredibly helpful for you as a student, and even more so as you as a student athlete, because you have naturally more on your plate than what a typical student will most likely have. Okay, so these are two that, again, hopefully we have as adults, but they don't always come quite so easy to everybody. But so this critical thinking and problem solving piece, and they kind of go hand in hand. So critical thinking, we're analyzing an issue or situation and the facts or data related to it. The biggest piece here being without influence of personal feelings, opinions, or biases. A good example I could think of with this is if you're a tutor coordinator and you get a text from an academic counselor and coach decided to have a team dinner tonight and it's 2 hours before tutoring starts and you need to change all these tutoring sessions and rework what you have. Obviously there's going to be some frustration and anger in that and because last minute change of schedule and just this is not the first time it's happened, but you're going to be able to make better decisions if you remove the emotion from that and you're able to critically think about, okay, what does the schedule look like if we try to reschedule these appointments? Okay, we can't reschedule them, so we're just going to have to cancel them. What does it look like to go through that process? But overall, you're going to be able to make clearer and better and more informed, logical decisions when you're taking that personal feelings, you're taking those opinions and biases out of it to come up with a way to solve the problem. And then just the natural way of solving a problem is going to be, defining the problem. So differentiating fact from opinion, what standard or expectation is not being met, and then we're determining the cause of the problem so that we can go into the next piece that's going to be identifying, prioritizing, and selecting those alternatives to this issue. And then the end piece being we're implementing that solution, we're giving feedback, we're establishing this ongoing monitoring to make sure this problem doesn't repeat itself. Or if we chose wrong on the third step of identifying those alternatives and selecting them, we can go back and fix it for the future. One piece really specific to social workers, specifically if you are licensed or not, but we are under the National Association of Social Workers and we have a code of ethics. And that's just, for professional and appropriate conduct for a social worker. It's very interesting that we have this code of ethics that we live up to as a profession, because I'm not sure outside of maybe the medical field that there are a lot of codes that professions live by and face repercussions if they do, I guess, break the rules. That's the best way to say it. So some examples that when I was looking through the code of ethics, like kind of with an academic set of eyes that I found, was the conflict of interest piece where, for example, right now it's March Madness. We cannot bet on the tournament. There's pieces of that that's just a conflict of interest. The privacy and confidentiality piece. When I heard a story, and I don't remember if it was what institution I was at when someone told me the story, but it's a mentor was, talking with her student and he told her that he was going to be declaring for the draft. And so he wouldn't be back next semester. Well, unfortunately, instead of keeping that information confidential and private to their session, she went home and told her boyfriend. And this person was a really highfalutin student athlete, and the boyfriend linked it to Twitter. And then that's how it got out that the student athlete was declaring for the draft. And so a piece that social workers really have to keep in mind is that privacy and confidentiality. And for those of us who work in academics, and sometimes with these revenue generating sports, we're going to have students who are on ESPN on a regular basis. And so people are naturally going to want to know, like, hey, do you work with the student? Or what can you tell me that's like, fun to know about the student? Or just these natural questions that people want to ask about those who are in the spotlight. And so as a social worker, there's that piece of confidentiality that this red flag kind of raises and you're like, okay, this is not something that is me talking about my clients or my student athletes outside of with professionals, is just not appropriate and something that social workers know really well. Also, a piece that is interesting is the relationships, and that as a social worker, this idea of once a client, always a client, and that even when services stop, that it's not like their role is going to change or our role in their life is going to change and become their friend. And I just think this is interesting to think about through the lens of athletics of, as professionals, we do have relationships with our student athletes, but there are clear and distinct boundaries, and those boundaries should look pretty similar, throughout our career and hopefully that professional relationship with them. And then lastly, one of these pieces of compliance that we have to think about on a regular basis is the payment of services, or not thinking about on a regular basis, but it's something that we are cognizant of, and that we can't accept gifts from our student athletes and we can't be giving gifts to our student athletes. And similar to a social worker, and that we should not be accepting many gifts from our clients. Obviously, we're getting paid to work with them, similar to how we're getting paid to work with our student athletes, but them clients paying for services is not appropriate. Something interesting too to think about is if you are a licensed social worker and you do break one of these rules, you end up on this list on the NASW website and you cannot practice social work again. And what's interesting is, like, a lot of times when compliance issues happen, there's a 10-year show cause order or whatever it might be, so that you could potentially in quite a long time work in athletics again. But that is not the case here. There's no show cause order. It's You're out. I see somebody unmuted. Oh, maybe not. Just kidding. Never mind. Anyways, but so once you break those rules, your license is taken away and you cannot practice social work under that license ever again. So we are going to take just a little bit of a break and watch this video. And I'm going to ask, after we watch this video, that y'all either unmute or drop in the chat maybe what you think you got from this about cultural competency, or what you believe about cultural competency to begin with.
Culture is a defining and vital aspect of every human being. Every culture has its own standpoint or worldview, and the way we behave or act is related strongly to this cultural worldview. Culture provides the norms and truths. Culture, worldviews and standpoints are essential to our sense of self. Importantly, culture is ever-changing in order to adapt to continuing flux and change of the world. Many of us have not considered or explored our cultures and how they affect the way we relate and connect with others. The world is a diverse space. For example, consider languages. Cultural competency could create world peace if we learn to really respect each other, if we could manage the dynamics of difference, acquire cultural knowledge, and appreciate the importance of knowing that there's not only one way of knowing, being and doing, but there are many, and that they're all valid. Cultural competency is a journey that you work on for the rest of your life, not something that you can achieve in 6 months or a year. But the journey will equip you with important skills that will assist you at university and in later life, in many settings. For example, critical reflection is a skill that you will acquire and develop.
So I would love to hear from y'all if there's any piece of that that really stuck out to you, or maybe if you're coming in here with an idea of what cultural competency is. If you would want to unmute or drop in the chat, I would love to hear from you.
I think the thing that stood out to me the most was when the speaker said that cultural competency is something you do for the rest of your life, not something that you achieve or a goal that you get to. And I think that just in our current times and discussing more topics around diversity, equity, inclusion, that can be a false narrative that this is something you can just earn. You can just understand it. You can take the program, you can go to the class, and now you have it. And so I just appreciate the fact that it's something you continue to learn and grow and build on for the rest of your life.
Thank you, Colette, for sharing. I appreciate that a lot. Is there anybody else? Yeah, Lauren said you can always learn and never get there. It's definitely something you're never going to achieve cultural competency or cultural competence. It is something that you, like Colette and both Lauren said, you're continually working on and continually learning.
Did she say that it could lead to world peace?
Yes, he did.
I like that.
Yeah, me too. I think it would definitely, I mean, we've been able to see really recently kind of the display, or it's been put on a more national display, what's been going on in our country. So I think with pieces of cultural competency, I agree. World peace seems like a very big idea, but also has potential. So a little, let's not watch that again. A little bit more into what cultural competency is. So it's our ability to work with people of diverse backgrounds with this inherent respect and responsiveness to cultural practices and beliefs. So we're working to understand where my colleague came from, where my student athlete has coming from, where my AD has come from. I'm trying to understand their background so that I can be more respectful, more responsive to what they're dealing with, what they're practicing on a regular basis, or something that they believe. And I think a huge piece of cultural competency is making the effort to examine your own personal background and identities. Something that my degree process made me, and this might sound really silly, so just bear with me. I grew up in a really homogenous place. Everyone looked just like me. And so I think in college, coming to terms with the fact that I'm a white woman and what privileges that brings with it, I'd never thought about that prior to being in college. And I had that's a huge privilege, to not have to reckon with, my race or my identity in that sense. So making the effort to understand, what's my history, where did I come from, and then how does that play a role in other people's lives. So we are consistently, seeking out necessary knowledge and skills to enhance the delivery of services, right? So, and these are going to be based off of race, gender, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, religion, age, or disability. That's a lot. It encompasses several different identities that a person can have at one time. And it seems huge to think about all of these pieces and trying to understand all of them about everyone. But like Colette and Lauren said in the video, we're never going to get there. So I would say don't let this be intimidating. Yes, we have so much to work on as individuals and nationally, but taking individual steps to understand our own background, understand where our people have come from, our friends, our students, is in a step in the right direction. So I would always say, ask questions, be curious. In that vein though, make sure you're asking questions that are kind. So be aware of your word choice in that. Wanted to draw your attention to the NCAA demographics. As you can see, a large portion of D1 student athletes are white, but I would venture to say that not all of these people subscribe to the same ideology or the same religion or the same culture. So even though they make up the largest percentage of student athletes, they are not all the same, just based off of their ethnicity. But we also have so many other, we have Black student athletes, Hispanic, people that are not citizens of this country, Asian, American Indian, Native Hawaiian. So we have a huge span of people lives that we get to touch on a regular basis. And as we can have seen from our country the past year and just in general, it is not a comforting place to be if you are not of the majority. And so why would we want in serving students to be another place where they don't feel comfortable, or another place where they feel like there's a guard that they have set up that they can't let down, because we have not taken the steps to make this a comfortable place for them to be. So I would just want to call our attention to this, just so we are aware. Yes, majority white student athletes, but again, they do not all subscribe to the same way of thinking or religion or culture. But then also we have several other ethnicities, and then even in those ethnicities, like I can promise you, all 9,916 Hispanic student athletes that we have do not subscribe to the same way of thinking, the same culture, the same religion. So in this grand total of 755,000 student athletes that we have in D1 sports, there's so many identities, so many people, so many backstories that we have the pleasure and we get to learn their stories and hear about them and serve them as well as possible while they're at our university. So a little bit, I've touched on this a few different times in this idea of cultural competency, but why is it important now? Why is it something that as a social worker and even as someone in any other professional or profession needs to be aware of? In the last week, we have been made aware of racial injustice that has left a massive mark on our country. And if we can't, like I said, if we can't be a safe place for our student athletes, then what are we doing? Our job, yes, it's to help these students succeed academically while they're here at college. But if we can't be a safe place for them, then I'm not sure that we're doing our job well or correctly. And I think having conversations as a staff and having conversations with your student athletes, it's going to aid in rapport building. It's going to aid in that relationship building. And I think that's a huge piece of our job. Yes, as a learning specialist, I'm working to build skills to create this independent learner. But if there's no buy-in from them, if there's no relationship, then our session, we're not milking it for all it's worth, in my opinion. So again, ask questions, be curious, maybe questions along the lines of, tell me more about that. If they have something specific they've brought up to you, oh, okay, I've never heard about that. Tell me more about it. I'm interested. Or that's so interesting. Where or who did you learn that from? Or something happens like what happened, earlier this week in Atlanta. If they feel comfortable talking about that, what does this situation bring up inside of you? What I think specifically again in learning specialist sessions, we have goals we need to achieve, but there has to be room for understanding that they're a whole person and not just this robot of a student athlete, but they're going to have fears and they're going to have things that are going on outside of our sessions that it's okay to take 5 minutes at the beginning or 5 minutes at the end and address them and have conversations around them. So I want to talk about three frameworks that social workers use a lot that can play really well into our job in academic support. So person environment is, based on the idea that we cannot fully understand an individual or their behavior without consideration of various aspects of the individual's environment. So again, this is going to be social, political, familial, spiritual, economic, and their physical sphere. That was a weird way to pronounce that. And we're as in an academic setting, we're able to assess the individual's presenting problems or the behavior, and this can widen our scope of interventions available. So for example, maybe there's not that academic buy-in present. Maybe there's no motivation in sessions. They're really struggling to understand, what's the point of me going to a tutor, or what's the point of me going to study hall? In this vein, I think it would be interesting to be able to ask the questions around, in high school, middle school, maybe even elementary school, did you spend any time outside of school working on homework, working on schoolwork? Was there any parental involvement for you when you were working through homework at home, after school? Just being able to understand, hey, my parents never had a role in my schoolwork, or I never worked on schoolwork. So it's weird that you are so much in my face about getting this assignment done, making sure I'm studying for this test. I'm not used to this level of involvement. And I think that can be a great conversation to have, to talk about, what your role is in that student's life, and then be able to go forward. But first, you're able to understand, hey, this is where the student is coming from. So we can assess and narrow down kind of our scope of interventions that we are going to use. So also an applicable approach, I think, that coming from a social work perspective, is the strengths-based approach. So we're really valuing what their current capacity is, their current skills, knowledge, connections, and the potential that they have as an individual. And I think this is huge when we are meeting with students who are really struggling with maybe one specific topic. For example, one of my students is a great storyteller. He will come in on Monday mornings and take the first few minutes of his session, telling me all these outlandish stories that happened over the weekend. But then we'll turn around and he needs to write a paper, and those skills, he's like, I can't start. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to even begin this paper. But obviously there's going to be transferable skills there, right? He can tell me verbally great stories, but getting them on paper, especially when they are about subjects he's not interested in, are really hard. So we've been really working on his note-taking ability, and now he can, look through an article, summarize the points, and he has been able to transfer those storytelling skills to his paper writing, because he's taking much better notes now. So using that strength he already had of he's a great storyteller and being able to transfer it into writing a paper, which is something historically he has not liked because he has not been great at it. And so being able to really hone in on those strengths and then use it to strengthen other areas for our students, whether you're an academic counselor, in learning support, someone who's in student development, I think all of those pieces can use this strength-based approach. So we're really emphasizing, origin of the strength, like you have resilience, how can we use that, and really trying hard to move away from a problem-focused perspective, which I think can really be a natural place for us to go sometimes, but really using our best effort to kind of shift that and view our students through a strengths-based approach. So real quick, if anyone would like to share, I would love to hear about maybe what situations in your career that you've used a strengths-based approach, or if you could go back and there's a situation you wish you would have used this for, what is that, and maybe why you would have used a strengths-based approach. Anyone?
I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, Molly, but when I think about that, I always think about because I'm a learning specialist at UGA, and so some of my students that do struggle academically, I'm always careful to make the comparison with their sport, just because I know that that's not all they are. But for the students that do appreciate that, I always let them know, like, you're great at this, like you're awesome at football. However, some people are great in academics. And so just what you do in football, like your natural talent, your practice, your dedication, those are some transferable skills that we can put in academics. And I just allow them to, because I think that sometimes our students can get down on themselves for not being the best student they can be, but they don't appreciate the talents that they have. And so I just always give them that, like, no, you're great at these things. Everyone's great at different things. So how can you use the same tools, practice, strategies, and all of that you do in your sport to academics to continue to get better? So I just try to let the students know that, because I think they appreciate that, where it's like, well, I can't go on the field and do what you do, So it's like that everyone's blessed with different talents, and how can we still encourage them and then utilize what they do in their independent sports to transfer over into the classroom.
Yeah, I really feel what you're saying. I know it's hard sometimes, I think, for our students to understand they got to this point athletically because of how much work they've put in, prior to this. So how much work have you put in, reading this book to write this paper, or, how much work have you put in, and then you see the results in your test grade. So I'm tracking with you, Colette. I feel what you're saying. So I want to run through quickly. I realize it's already 4:45 and it's Friday afternoon, so I don't want to keep y'all forever. Just 3 types of job postings that I think I'm going to pull out specific things that a social worker would have. So in this advising position, be aware of and refer to campus resources. That's that advocacy piece of, as a social worker, you're constantly, trying to grow your resources that you can give to clients or in this space, student athletes. This next one is you're creating and implementing an academic plan for student success based off the individual student athlete needs. So you're able to use that critical thinking and problem solving. You're able to actively listen as a student is telling you what they believe is their own, struggles and stressors when it comes to academics. Then this piece about facilitating and encourage professor communication as an advisor and contacting the faculty athletics rep when necessary. Having those communication skills, being able to communicate well with professors, is a huge piece of being an academic advisor. And being able to do that well is going to win you respect. And I feel like people are more willing to work with you and work for you, when you have that communication piece. And then one of these last ones, it says run reports to assess holds on accounts, and communicate with student athlete and coaches. Obviously, there's a lot more documentation than just that, but I think, it's a piece of the documentation, maintaining files and records. Here at Baylor, as a learning specialist, we document everything. We have a running documentation of by each semester, by each student, of our sessions that we have with them and what we accomplish. And so I think this is huge. One, to be able to look back and say, you know what, in the last 6 weeks, we've been able to accomplish, these things, and just being able to document and maintain those files. So in this learning specialist position, we're developing and evaluating programs. It says you're responsible for assisting in the development, implementation, and evaluation of our athletic support services. And so that's a huge piece of social work that I talked about. I took a class solely on evaluating programs that I'm sure you get in other degrees, but I definitely am always going to be pro social work. And so I think we are really equipped to handle this. The communication piece as well here, maintaining communication with coaches, compliance, administration on the progress of student athletes, and identifying issues as necessary to the coaching staff. I think this is an interesting piece when concerning talking about student athletes to coaches, being cognizant of our wording, painting them in a honest but kind light, I think is really important. And so having those communication skills is pinnacle, here, talking to academic coaches, talking to learning specialists, talking to student development, but in my opinion, even more so when talking to coaches, just to be able to speak about them in a respectful way. And then that professional commitment would come into play with compliance. No matter what conference you're in, you're going to have specific conference rules, you're going to have NCAA rules, and then also rules at your institution. So just being aware of those. And then that rapport building piece of, as a learning specialist, a huge piece of your job is going to be that rapport and relationship building to get, a piece of that buy-in. So this last one is a student development job posting. And here we are again with developing and evaluating programs. So this position, you're going to be creating a multi-year development program, including but not limited to personal skills, inclusion, career, and professional development, as well as community service and leadership. You're identifying needs for these seminars that you're creating and workshops. You're building rapport and being able to adjust to change with this meeting with one-on-one with student athletes to provide career development guidance. That's a huge adjustment to life after athletics or life in professional sports, one that we need to pay attention to and need to be able to equip our students to handle. And then lastly, here we are again with this resource development. For this job posting, it was coordinating resources to be added to their weekly website so that student athletes have an easy place to find them. Let's see what time. Okay, we have just a few minutes. There was a study done. So I tried to make this as appeasable to like several pieces in the academic department, but because I am a learning specialist, I'm just a little bit more inclined to know about those pieces. But there was a study done in 2018 to kind of define what a learning specialist was and what their essential duties were, since it's somewhat new in like the arms race of college athletics. So they found through their study, or they surveyed 104 learning specialists through N4A, and 90 people responded. And so these are what they found as the main tasks of a learning specialist. So they're developing learning strategies with student athletes, they're holding study hall, and they're sending assignment reminders. I laugh at that because I feel like I do that on almost an hourly basis sometimes. But one of the strongest predictors they found for long-term academic success was active engagement in the education process while simultaneously strengthening deficits through learning strategies and study skill instruction. I think an example, like the active engagement in the education process is huge. If there was none, prior to this, how can we get our students to actively buy into a college education is going to be worth its salt at the end? If you're only here to play sports, I understand, but what can we gain from this experience, this education that we are being given, to really benefit from in the end? And I believe that all people can build relationships and that all people are qualified to do that. But I just really believe in my degrees as a social worker that I have been taught and shown examples of ways to do that really well. And so I am really confident in my skills and my in rapport building and relationship building. So then a little bit more into what they defined as the role of a learning specialist, and you're building cognitive and non-cognitive skills. So those cognitive skills are thinking, reading, learning, remembering, and reason. And then the non-cognitive skills were motivation, integrity, and interpersonal interactions, which three of those things I believe, and then non-cognitive skills that social workers really have in spades and are able to teach and help students understand what the emphasis is behind them. So they're also developing learning and study strategies, which is a part of our job as a learning specialist really naturally. And then we're also providing interventions that address academic motivation and developing that positive attitudes towards school. So that active engagement piece and that buy-in. And then really trying our best to prepare students to advocate for themselves and for the appropriate support, because eventually, you know, the end goal is they graduate off caseload, or eventually they're going to be graduating college or leaving school. And so really we want to be able to instill in them, how do I advocate for myself and for the appropriate support or the appropriate things that I need in my life. Okay, that was a lot of information. I would love to hear if anyone has questions. If not, that is also okay. But I wanted to give us a little bit of time if anyone does have any questions. I'll do my best to answer.
I have a question. It's something I've been thinking about all week. So we talk a lot about having empathy towards our students and treating them with respect and all of these things. And that comes very naturally to me. However, when a student comes forth with a very hateful view and expresses that with passion, for example, homophobia seems to be rampant. How do y'all address that?
Well, I can tell you, I can't speak for all of Baylor academics or all of our learning support group, but I can say from experiences that I've had in my office with my students, when someone makes a joke like, oh, he did whatever, and that's just so gay, and then they like are very repulsed by that. I often like ask questions around that of like, okay, well, why is that weird that he did that? Or why is it gross that he did that? Or would it, let's say for kicks and giggles, he is gay, this person does like men, why is that weird, to begin with? And so I think for me personally, when someone comes with like you said, a really strong opinion, but I think I just ask a lot of questions around like, well, where did that come from? Like, why do you believe that? Maybe to kind of get a little bit more understanding about why they believe what they believe.
Yeah, I think to expand, like in our social work education, because I also have my master's in social work, like we don't, do we challenge that belief? Like your clients come to you and they have their opinions and they have their beliefs, like, I don't know, do you?
I would say that I do not have my master's in social work, so just want to be clear. But I challenge the beliefs of my student athletes, and that happens to me too. So just don't feel alone in that. Where I just get them, and again, I'm not sure if this is correct, but this is just how I walk my students through it. I honestly ask them about the way that they identify and when did they decide they identified like that. And the reason I do that is because I just want them to realize that the way, let's say if they decided, well, in elementary school, I mean, I just knew I like girls. And, I'm like, well, that's also someone else's reality for whoever that they were attracted to. That was their reality. And so what if I decided I just don't believe you? What if I just say, well, you need more time in college? Like, we don't know. We don't know if you really genuinely like girls. Like maybe you just need some more years in college and we'll see. And I tell them that. And just because I want them to see that the way their logic is based on I'm not going to believe someone else's experience. And so I just try to go there. And I do that with my student athletes that I do have a relationship with, that I feel very comfortable doing that with. But I will challenge those student athletes where, and I understand what you're saying, where it's like, if I haven't built that relationship, I definitely let them know the words that I'm not okay with in my office and why I'm not okay with them. But the ones that we have built a relationship, I just challenge them to think, well, how about your sexual orientation? Just reflect on how you got to there, and someone else has gotten to there too, and just in a different path. But if I don't believe you, just because you don't believe them, you would have offense with me if I said, well, I just don't believe you. And so I think that kind of makes them pause and reflect. I don't know if I'm making a difference, but at least they pause and reflect and think about it.
I
Yeah,
think
like,
that's the way. Oh, go ahead, Molly. Yeah.
no, I was just gonna say, like Colette said, like, I don't have my master's in social work, I just have my BSW, but like, I challenge the student athletes that I work with, like, challenge them through education. Like, I try to put myself, like, I try to look at it through the pie perspective of like, okay, this kid is coming from rural Mississippi, so I can understand why they have the thoughts and beliefs that they do, but also educating them that it's okay to have other thoughts and beliefs, and it's okay that your thoughts and beliefs evolve as you garner that education.
Yeah. Thanks y'all for sharing. I'm enjoying this conversation. Anyone else have any questions?
I put it in the chat, Molly, but I didn't know because I'm familiar with that study that you shared about the learning specialist, but I didn't know if they shared anything about having social work backgrounds, just because I think you did a great job of connecting the skills of a social worker and someone who's working in the academic field. But I didn't know if anyone in that study had said like they had identified with that education as a social worker.
Yeah, that's a good question. So on like the in the back of the study, obviously they had the questionnaire and their responses to the questionnaire that they got, and there wasn't anybody that was surveyed with that study specifically that had a social work background. Most of it was higher education or sports admin, sports management, but there wasn't anyone specifically in that study that had the social work background. Alrighty, anybody else? Okay, well, I have really enjoyed talking to y'all and with y'all today. I would love to connect with you if at all possible, but here's my contact information, and I'll leave it up for a second, and then Allie, who is our LSU rep, or she's not a rep, but she is facilitating this call for us today. She has to put her screen up here in just a minute to do a few things, so I'll leave that there, and in just a second I'll stop sharing. Okay, Allie, you are game to share, my friend.
Okie dokie. So the last thing we have is if you wouldn't mind scanning the QR code for our session evaluation, we'd really appreciate it if you fill it out. It's also in your program if for some reason this one is not working. So I'll just leave that up for a few minutes so y'all can scan it.
All right, thank y'all for being here today. I'm so excited that y'all are here. There was only a few of us, but I'm for it. That is fine with me. I'll play some music so we don't awkwardly sit here in silence, but I hope y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy. I hope it's pretty outside wherever you are. I'll see y'all later.
Break my heart, hope you're just a little sorry. Say a little less. I think I know the story. What your mouth don't say, your eyes finish for me. I will try to call or be a bother. If you need me, all you have to do is holler. Maybe there's no way to change your mind, but I hope you're just a little bit sorry. I hope you're just a little bit sorry. I hope you're just a little bit sorry. Oh, a little bit sorry. Why you break my heart? I hope you're just a little sorry. Maybe there's no way to change.
Okay, bye, Allie. I'll see you later. It was so nice to meet you.